Before the name of Thales echoed among kings and scholars, before the sky became a map, and before logic rose to challenge, myth of everything began in a small harbor city on the Ionian coast, Miletos. Miletos was not a city of grand palaces or towering temples. It lived on waves and wind, on wooden ships arriving from every corner of the Mediterranean. In the morning, the sound of ropes and sails blended with the shouts of merchants. The salty scent of the sea mingled with the fragrance of Phoenician spices, silk from the east and olive oil from the Aegean. This city was like the belly of the world, a place where goods, ideas and dreams came to anchor. Amid the noise of the bustling harbor, a child was born to a humble family. His name Thales. He was not a nobleman, nor a temple priest, nor an heir to power. But from an early age, he possessed something sharper than any sword, an insatiable curiosity. While other children ran along the harbor, young Thales often sat still, staring at the sea and the sky. He watched ships disappear into the horizon and return, days later, always from the same direction. As if following some invisible rule, he observed the stars at night, appearing in the same patterns as before, as though the sky spoke a secret language. People around him explained everything with myths. High waves? The sea god was angry. A shooting star? A messenger from the heavens. But in Thales' young mind, a sharper question formed than any legend. Why? That question never stopped echoing. Every ship that docked, every story from foreign traders, every temple ritual, all became pieces of a vast puzzle about the world. And Miletos, with all its diversity, became a living library for the boy. Years later, people would call Thales the first philosopher. But at that time, he was simply a harbor child who loved to ask questions. He had no holy book, no great teacher. His teachers were the sky, the sea, and the people of many cultures. This is where it all began, not from an ivory tower, but from a simple pier facing the open sea. From a city that kept no secrets, but revealed them to anyone bold enough to observe. In his youth, Thales didn't just learn from his hometown. The Aegean Sea became his greatest classroom. Miletos trading ships often sailed far, to Phoenicia, to the Nile Delta of Egypt, even to distant ports in the east. And on every voyage, Thales absorbed more knowledge than any temple priest could have offered. On the first night he sailed, the sea breeze carried the salty scent and the creak of sails. On deck, seasoned sailors pointed to the stars, explaining how they navigated the ocean using nothing but the night sky. Thales listened, memorized, and then observed the star patterns night after night. "The North Star is always there," said a Phoenician captain. "As long as you face it, you will not be lost." Thales was not content to simply believe. He began measuring angles, comparing star positions with the ship's direction, noting time and changes in the heavens. That was when he realized something. The sky was not a mystery. It was a system that could be studied, predicted, and used. His next journey took him to Egypt. There he was fascinated, not only by the pyramids, but by a civilization that used the stars to organize life itself. Egyptian priests read celestial movements to determine harvest seasons and the flooding of the Nile. Their calculations were precise, not mere prayers. Thales learned, questioned, wrote, and absorbed everything. But what set him apart was not just his ability to understand. It was his courage to reinterpret. He did not accept Egyptian and Phoenician knowledge as sacred inheritance. He tested it with his own reason. One night on the ship, gazing at the starry sky, Thales said to his companion, "If that star always remains in the same place, then all of this must follow a pattern. If there is a pattern, there is a law. And if there is a law, the world can be understood." That was the moment the seed of scientific philosophy took root. The belief that the world can be known through reason and observation, not just faith and myth. When Thales arrived in Egypt, he was a nobody, a young foreigner from a small harbor town. But what astonished the temple priests of Memphis was this: he came not to pray, but to ask questions. Egypt at the time was a civilization of practical mathematics. Their pyramids, canals, and fields existed not because of myths, but because of precise, geometric calculations. Thales realized that here was where humans first mastered nature through intellect. Every morning he walked along the Nile, watching Egyptian surveyors at work. They stretched knotted ropes in the early form of triangle measurement to divide farmlands after the annual flood. Thales watched with the eyes of a researcher. At night, he climbed temple rooftops with astronomer priests to watch the star Sirius rise, heralding the flood of the Nile. Thales learned that the sky could give signs to the earth. Their knowledge was advanced, but wrapped in temple grandeur and divine symbolism. Yet Thales thought further. If they can measure the height of a pyramid, he wondered, why not a mountain? Or the distance to the stars? One afternoon, the long shadow of a pyramid inspired him. He noticed that when his own shadow matched his height, the pyramid's shadow had the same proportion to its height. He smiled. This was the birth of practical geometry. No climbing, no tools, just observation and logic. The Egyptians saw a clever trick. Thales saw a universal law, something applicable anytime, anywhere. 585 BC, in an open field between the kingdoms of Lydia and Media, two great armies stood ready to clash. Spears gleamed, horses neighed, war cries pierced the air. The world then believed the gods of war decided the victor. But far away, one philosopher from Miletos had read the signs invisible to soldiers. Eyes, the sky. Thales, who had studied solar and lunar cycles from Egypt and Babylon, predicted that on that day the sun would vanish at noon. As the first spear was raised and the armies charged, the sun suddenly dimmed. Shadows spread, day turned into night, birds fell silent, people collapsed to their knees. King Miletos of Lydia and King Xerxes of Media froze. They believed the gods had intervened. Only one man knew this was no curse. It was calculation. The historian Herodotus later recorded this extraordinary moment. Two warring kings stopped fighting and signed a truce because of a total solar eclipse. It was not swords or arrows that ended the bloodshed. It was knowledge. To the ancient world, Thales seemed like a sorcerer. But to the history of science, this was a turning point. The first recorded rational prediction of a celestial event, not by temple priests, but by a philosopher-scientist. King Miletos was a stubborn ruler, used to making decisions through power, not words. But that day was different. After the eclipse turned war into peace, Miletos summoned one foreigner to his tent, Thales of Miletos. "How did you know the sun would disappear?" the king asked. Thales calmly replied, "Because the sun is not a god, your majesty. It follows laws." The king was stunned. In that era, a priest's words outweighed anyone else's, but Thales had shown something greater than belief. A prediction that came true. From that day on, Thales was no longer just a skywatcher. He became a strategic advisor. The king consulted him on weather signs, sea routes, even timing for harvest and trade. A philosopher now sat in the circle of power, not because he carried holy scriptures, but because his knowledge worked. After the eclipse, Thales' name spread from port to port. Phoenician sailors spoke of him on their decks. Egyptian priests mentioned him in their star discussions. He became a new symbol, a man who could read nature without invoking gods. He began teaching not by preaching but by asking questions. "The world can be understood," he told his students. A simple sentence, but for the ancient world, it was a revolution of thought. Thales continued his voyages, to Phoenicia, to Egypt, perhaps even to Babylon. He did not just bring back goods, he carried ideas. Each place gave him a piece of knowledge, which he then wove into a grand understanding of the world. In Phoenicia, he learned navigation. In Egypt, geometry. In Babylon, astronomy. But to him, knowledge was not owned by nations. Knowledge belonged to humanity. Among his many ideas, the one that shook the ancient world most was this: water is the principal arche of everything. To Thales, water was not just an element, but the foundation of all change. While others explained the world through myths, Thales offered the first rational hypothesis. He observed, all life depends on water. The earth floats on water. Water exists everywhere. Therefore, water is the origin. This was the birth of natural philosophy, the first step toward modern science. Thales never founded a formal academy, but from the port of Miletus emerged the first generation of free thinkers. His students, like Anaximander and Anaximenes, carried on not just his teachings but his method, to observe, to reason, to test. The world slowly shifted, from stories of gods to theories of humankind. Thales died around 546 BC, but his ideas never did. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle hailed him as the man who first opened the door to knowledge through reason. Sailors still navigated by the stars he once studied. Scientists still remembered his way of thinking. Thales did not build palaces, but he built the foundation of rational inquiry. And like the lighthouse in the harbor of Miletus, his light continues to shine, guiding explorers of knowledge through the ages.